New Mexico is an odd place. It's rich in indigenous people's history. It's home of the desert and hatch green chili, but it also has some of the wildest true crime cases you will ever hear about. And many of those remain unsolved, oftentimes being uncovered by just everyday civilians. Just on a normal afternoon, a dog found a human femur. And what this would lead to still remains unsolved to this day. Hey, I'm Serenity and this is my channel, and today we're joined by Nebula, Clover, Ginger's behind Nebula. This case is one that haunts me, especially because I was actually in Albuquerque during the time this case was happening, really being investigated, because I had a very close family member live there for most of my childhood. We're talking about the mysterious mass grave in West Mesa, Albuquerque, New Mexico, the 11 victims, and how the case still remains unsolved. And we don't know if it's necessarily a serial killer or a group of killers, a group targeting women of the night. So before we begin, I just want to give trigger warnings for the following: mentions of murder, sex trafficking, mentions of murder of an infant, one of the victims was pregnant, mentions of necrophilia, mentions of rape, and child assault. If any of these topics you believe you'd be unable to handle, please stop watching, put yourself first, and I'll see you at a later date with a different video. If I get any information wrong, please kindly let me know down below. I try to get the following information as accurate as possible. However, I use multiple different sources, and if only one source mentioned one certain detail, but I couldn't confirm it with another source, I went with the most commonly reported aspect of that detail. But as always, all my sources are linked down below, so you can do additional research yourself. Lastly, this video is an informational research study that I am sharing for academic, entertainment reasons only. I mean absolutely no harm to anyone mentioned, especially the victim and the victim's family. It was a chilly Tuesday afternoon on February 2nd, 2009 in Albuquerque, New Mexico, the state capital, when a woman named Christine Ross took her dog, Ruka, out for their daily walk. So they could stretch their legs, do their business outside, sniff around the dirt and the grass, the normal things dogs do on a walk. Nothing was out of the ordinary about the pair's daily routine until Ruka stopped on a local trail and pulled out a large bone out of the earth. Christine was immediately disturbed, feeling like the size of the bone was just too large to be from an animal that lives in the desert. So she snapped a photo to send over to her sister, who worked as a registered nurse. It would take some time, but her sister would get back to her later that day and confirm Christine's suspicions. It was a human femur bone. Christine immediately jumped into action and called the Albuquerque Police Department, where officers immediately came out to her to determine if this bone was in fact a human femur bone. Police did confirm that Ruka had found a human femur. An intensive search of the area where Ruka located this bone would commence over the following weeks, and detectives searched this area intensely. What they would find would be truly horrifying. They uncovered a grave in West Mesa. It's an area of the city of Albuquerque, kind of on the outskirts. It's not necessarily the outskirts of the city, but it is kind of out there where, like, I think every city has a piece of land that isn't developed yet, and this is a part of Albuquerque like that at the time. In this area, the skeletal remains would be found for 11 women and one unborn child. One of the victims was pregnant. All of the victims would be found buried in makeshift graves. Police were actually able to narrow down the time frame of when these women were buried to the years between 2001 and 2005, and they actually could cut it down to a shorter time frame later on. They were all buried in the Arroyo Bank area of West Mesa, which, as I said, is an area, it's still within city limits, but it is underdeveloped. It was pretty much desert. And if you've ever been to Albuquerque, there are a lot of areas where the desert, it's still normalized, I guess. It's still there. You can drive in like a residential neighborhood where there is a grocery store and a small shopping center mall and homes and a school, and there still will be like a patch of land that is desert and untouched. So this patch of land in the city was untouched completely. Using satellite images that are taken yearly between the years of 2003 and 2005, they saw photos of tire tracks and disturbed areas of soil in this area of West Mesa where the remains were unearthed. The images were also able to determine that the last victim was buried in 2005. By 2006, there was a new development of possible houses and buildings being constructed in the area. So keep in mind, none of these bodies were found till 2009, but in 2006, the area was planning to be developed. So soon after this, the area would be disturbed by platting for residential development. So they started marking out where they were going to lay the concrete, that sort of thing, where the water lines would go, all of that. But the construction of this new neighborhood was halted in 2008 during the housing bubble collapse when we had a recession in America. So luckily the graves were not built on top of, and luckily they would be discovered, so the victims could be located. During this time, the neighbors began complaining of flooding on this area site, and the developers began building a wall to channel stormwater that would run off into a man-made pond approximately to the area of the grave. So this man-made pond was directing water to this area where the grave was. So this excess water that was entering the area would be the reason that the femur bone was found, because the bones of all the victims started rising to the surface as erosion of the dirt and rock was sped up due to the excess water entering the area. And keep in mind, this area is a desert. We don't get a lot of water. And this was the main reason that Ruka was able to find the bone. On December 9th, 2010, Albuquerque police released 6 photos of 7 women who remained unidentified and may also be victims of the West Mesa killer or killers, but not any of the 11 that were buried there. Police did not reveal how or why they had these photos specifically, just that they all shared physical characteristics of the original 11 victims, and they all were unconscious in their photos. The next day, on December 10th, officers released another photo of a different woman who was identified by her family members, who reported to authorities that she actually passed away from natural causes years prior. They knew how she passed. On December 13th, 2010, police reported 2 of these 6 women in the photos were reported to be alive and working on locating them. So jumping forward to June of 2018, more bones were found near the mass grave site, and people feared that there would be more victims uncovered, but these bones actually turned out to be ancient remains, nothing to do with this case. Now let's talk about the victims. Forensics investigators were able to identify all 11 victims, and 10 out of the 11 shared a common link. They all had strong ties to drugs and prostitution work. However, only one of the victims had no ties to either of these, but she was connected to another one of the victims directly. I would like to tell you about these women, their lives before their passing, but this case has very limited details on that. So normally I would tell you what they were like, their friends, their family, how they grew up, their favorite color, their favorite food, any information I could tell you as who they were as a person, but that is just not available in this case. The one victim who was known not to be affiliated with drugs or prostitution was a 15-year-old named Jamie Barella, who was last seen at a family gathering in April of 2004. Jamie was at this family gathering with her cousin Evelyn Salazar, who was actually another one of the victims. They both left the family kickback together to walk to a park near the streets of San Mateo and Gibson Southeast in the southeast area of Albuquerque. Now, the pair would never be seen again after this night, and they were found in the 118th Street of Southwest Mesa, which is the street near the Mesa grave. It is what the official address of the Mesa grave is. Jamie's cousin, Evelyn Salazar, was 27 years old, who disappeared with her cousin that night. She was identified using DNA evidence found on her skeletal remains. Jamie would be identified on January 26, 2010, and Evelyn would have been identified 2 months prior in November of the prior year. The next victim was 22-year-old Monica Candelaria, and she was killed between 2003 and 2005. In 2006, 26-year-old Victoria Chavez was taken and killed. 24-year-old Virginia Colvin was reported missing in 2004, and it was believed that she was killed between 2004 and 2005. She was able to be identified using DNA evidence. Between 2004 and 2005, 28-year-old Veronica Romero was killed. Between 2004 and 2005, 24-year-old Julie Nieto was also murdered. Between 2003 and 2005, 24-year-old Doreen Marquez was killed. Between 2004 and 2005, 22-year-old Michelle Valdez was murdered and buried in the West Mesa mass grave. She was also the victim that was pregnant at the time of her death, with her unborn child who was 4 months in utero, and that child would be found buried with her. Between 2004 and 2005, 32-year-old Cinnamon Elks was murdered. Zelania Edwards was killed between 2004 and 2005. Police used sketches and dental records to identify her. She was classified as an endangered runaway and reported missing in 2003 by Lawton, Oklahoma authorities. In May of 2004, Zelania was first seen associating with prostitutes in Aurora, Colorado on East Colfax Avenue and was possibly staying at a local inn called Ranger Motel. Often she was seen with 3 other women named Ty, Diamond, and Lucretia, while possibly going by the nicknames Mimi or Chocolate. Zelania was only 15 when she was last seen. So with this, the mass grave murderer had been nicknamed the 183rd Street Killer based on the street address where the grave was located. All 11 victims were aged between 15 and 32 years old. Most were Hispanic, if you couldn't guess by their last names, and only Zelania was an African-American woman. She was also the only victim from out of state. Forensic experts at the University of North Texas were able to identify the remains of Virginia Colvin and Evelyn Salazar on November 17th of 2009, using DNA evidence found on their skeletal remains. One of the investigators on the investigation, Detective Ida Lopez, actually constructed a list of missing Albuquerque women prior to 2009, all of which had ties to prostitution and drug addictions when they went missing between 2001 and 2006. 10 of the women on this list were 10 women found buried in West Mesa grave, but there was 9 more with similar backgrounds, and those still remain missing. Police have raised concerns that there could be more victims of the same killer or killers, but they're buried at different locations. Of the names on the list, 9 remain, and I'm putting them on screen for you right now to see their names, their ages, and how they went missing, in case you may know one of them. Police have also come to refer to the person that they think is responsible for the deaths as the West Mesa bone collector because of the remains all being bones, but no one has officially been named the suspect in connection to the murders. In 2010, police began offering a $100,000 reward money for any information leading to the arrest and conviction of the person or persons responsible, and that money is still available for the same information today. Over the years, many men have been considered possibly being involved, but none have been named full suspects to the public. So let's go over the main suspects. Fred Reynolds was a pimp who knew one of the missing women and apparently had multiple photos of missing sex workers in the area, but in 2009, he died of natural causes before the grave was discovered. Another suspect was a man named Lorenzo Montoya. He was a press at a local printer shop who lived less than 3 miles away from the mass grave. He was arrested twice for violent offenses and attacks on sex workers. He threatened to kill his girlfriend at the time this was happening and to bury her in lime, which is a type of building sediment rock. His co-workers also claimed that he heard Lorenzo talk about killing women and burying them in West Mesa, which is a really odd coincidence. In December of 2006, Lorenzo Montoya actually strangled a 19-year-old sex worker named Sharika Hill at his trailer home before he was shot dead by the young girl's boyfriend named Frederick Williams, who claimed that Montoya was actually taking his girlfriend's limp body, like unconscious body, to put in the trunk of his car before he shot him dead. When law enforcement arrived on the scene, they told Frederick that they believed that this was not the first time that Lorenzo tried killing someone because his attempt was too brutal. Seems valid. It's also worth noting that after Lorenzo died, the West Mesa killing stopped. While searching his home, detectives came across his personal camera, and this is very disturbing. A section of the video that had been recorded on this camera was released to the public on local news stations for citizens to watch. But the other part police did talk about that could not be released, and it's very disturbing. It showed Lorenzo having intercourse with an unidentified woman with a high possibility that she was no longer alive in the clip before the clip faded to black. And it transitioned to another scene, if you will, that showed just a wall and a bed in the background. And off camera, this section of the video, you could hear noises being made, which sounded like duct tape being cut from the roll and the opening of a garbage bag. So, you know, when you open a garbage bag, you pull the top apart and then you do this to blow air into it. That's what it sounded like. The theory by police was this possibly was Montoya preparing to take a body to West Mesa for disposal. Police collected screenshots of the woman in that first half of the video in hopes they could use those photos to help identify her. In August of 2010, police traveled to Joplin, Missouri to search multiple properties associated with a local photographer and businessman named Ron Erwin in connections to this case. this is where it gets a little confusing, but it will come back later. There's a series of suspects in this case, multiple suspects in this case, who are out of state. And it's all going to connect to the most popular theory that netizens have on this case. But Ron Irwin, in his home, police confiscated tens of thousands of photos from Ron Irwin, who reportedly used to travel to New Mexico for the state fair yearly. Now, I don't know about you, I've never even been to the Texas or New Mexico state fair, living on the border between both, and to cross 3 states to get to a state fair is odd. That is weird, and to do it yearly. There is no family ties that police could find to Ron Irwin having family in New Mexico, namely Albuquerque, where the state fair is held. Police, though, did clear Irwin as a suspect. In December of 2010, a Colorado convicted serial killer named Scott Lee Kimball claimed he was being investigated for the West Mesa murders, but he denied being responsible. In 2014, a breakthrough in another case, a separate case, a cold case in Albuquerque, caused police to look into a man named Joseph Lee as a suspect in this case. So Joseph had been dubbed the mid-school rapist for his crimes in the 1980s. Police told the public that his MO was to break into homes of girls aged 13 to 15 who lived near the McKinley Middle School area, and he would assault them. In one of the cases, there was DNA evidence of a sample, but the rape test kit that was performed on the young girl would not be retested until 2010, which then would finally link Joseph Lee to the crime. In 2015, he was suspected of killing a sex worker because his DNA sample was found in their inner waistband and belt of the person who passed on Central Avenue, a notorious area for sex workers in the eastern part of Albuquerque. Another big piece of evidence that a lot of people think Joseph Lee is responsible is that there was a tree tag, which is the tag you get when you buy a plant, telling you what the plant is, that sort of thing, from a local nursery found very close to where the West Mesa victims were buried. And this was a nursery that Blay frequented often. He also had multiple women's jewelry and underwear in his home that did not belong to his wife or his daughter. And police never confirmed if this was stuff he took from his teenage girl victims or if this was something else, but it is odd to have that much jewelry and undergarments that do not belong to anyone in your family. He also allegedly told his cellmate that he hired the West Mesa victims for sex work and called them trashy. So whether that he did it or not, even just claiming that he knew them is very suspicious. In June of 2015, Joseph Blay was sentenced to 36 years in prison for the middle school rape case. It is unclear if he's still alive, but he is still behind bars, which is great. Now, a final theory that many New Mexican citizens believe is the most likely happened comes from an anonymous tip to the Albuquerque Police Department and the FBI that claimed to link the murders to a suspect from Central America. Police suspected that there was a sex trafficking ring going on, and it operated mainly in Texas, which, if you don't know, Albuquerque to Texas is 3.5 hours, and it targeted prostitutes during populated events in the southwest, southeast, southern parts, and western parts of the United States. So Texas, New Mexico, that way. Especially high-ticket events like the New Mexico State Fair, where a lot of people are coming into the city who may not necessarily live there just to attend the fair. And it's hard to keep track of who is in and out of the city because hundreds, if not tens of thousands of people are coming in, especially during a time like this, when social media wasn't really a thing. Now, if you go on a trip, you take a photo of you getting on the plane. Back then, maybe you'd go get your disposable camera photos developed after your trip. They believe that this human trafficking ring involved many populated cities like Las Vegas, Nevada, Denver, Colorado, and El Paso and Killeen, Texas. As someone whose hometown is El Paso, it is very believable because from El Paso, you can go from Las Cruces, New Mexico to El Paso, Texas to Juarez, Mexico in an hour and a half. It also explains why multiple suspects in this case were from out of state. 13 years after the discovery, on February 2nd of 2022, police and city officials made another plea to the public asking for any new information on the case. Albuquerque mayor at the time, Tim Keller, said, and I quote, "The only way this case is going to get solved is with our community's help or even communities around us that might know something," stating this is an active investigation. Now, in 2018, the former APD chief Mike Gier spoke to a local news station stating that Lorenzo Montoya and Joseph Blay were the two most likely suspects in this case, stating, and I quote, "I think there are two strongest candidates, so to speak, as the main suspects But you know, sometimes there's a surprise and there may be someone we never even looked at. A suspect is actually somebody we anticipate charging with the crime, and I don't think we ever actually reach that stage to develop enough grounds or enough probable cause to point fingers at one individual, which is the biggest part in this case. Not one person has been named. This is our main suspect. Nothing like that has happened. There's been a lot of people who have been named possible, but not this is our guy. And there's also the question if this was just one person or multiple. The new APD chief, Harold Medina, and a retired APD homicide sergeant named Liz Thompson are now the ones leading the investigation on this case, which Liz Thompson is a cold case contractor. She is the lead investigator. And she told press in 2022 about this case, and I quote, "We have eliminated many suspects at this time. There are a number of people being investigated as persons of interest. There is more than two, more than a few. The number of suspects does change as we start looking into a new tip or eliminate someone. But I can tell you it is more than two people that are commonly out there. This person may have been charming or friendly in order to build trust or a relationship of some kind with the woman first. This person is a predator. He sought out vulnerable women. And sex work is a very vulnerable job." In June of 2020, the city of Albuquerque opened the long-awaited memorial park at the burial site, honoring the victims' lives in this case. Each of the women's names were etched into the oval-shaped path around the park, and across from each of their name where it was etched in the path, there was a bench and a specialized tree that the families got to pick out for them, so they have a place to go and remember their loved one. Mayor Tim Keller addressed the public at this opening of the park, and I quote, "This is for not only to remember and celebrate those women who were murdered, but also for the daughters, sisters, mothers, cousins, friends, and neighbors who also must remember." One of the victims' daughters told the press, and I quote, "It hurts every single day, but having the support and having everyone show up for us and recognize the women, it means a lot to us." Which we don't know a lot about these women's personal lives, but knowing one of the victims had a child who had to grow up and still 2 decades later don't have justice is horrible. So this case is still open, and that is why I wanted to talk about it. Detectives are currently looking for any leads that you may have, and if you know anything about the victims, investigators would like to hear from women who may have been working in the streets of Albuquerque as sex workers at the time. Between 2001 and 2005, maybe they saw something, maybe someone was suspicious. We don't know if the women were on a job when they were attacked. We don't know if the killer or killers stalked the areas where the women frequented to take them, followed them home. We don't know any of that. And police are also looking to see if anyone had solicited the victims during a period of that time that maybe one of the other workers saw. So that reward of $100,000 is still available for any information leading to the arrest and conviction in this case of a person or persons responsible. If you have any information concerning the victims and or any potential suspects with evidence, you are asked to contact the 118th Street Task Force at 1-877-765-8273 or 505-768-2450. Crime Stop can also be called. Any information at 505-843-STOP. That's 505-843-STOP. And that is all the information I have on this case. It is a very solemn case. It always hurts when cases are unsolved, especially when there are 11 families in this case who still don't have justice and whose loved ones disappeared for years before they even found out they were no longer alive. And 2 of these families lost 2 people. One was pregnant, so the next generation was being born, and a pair of cousins were taken. All we know really is that the perpetrator or perpetrators was targeting sex workers, and we can call it what it is. This is femicide, which no one should be killed at their job. I remember actually being in Albuquerque when they were digging the mass grave sites, visiting my family member who lived there, and the case was breaking. So sometimes those memories are unlocked until you're researching a case, and then I confirmed it with that family member. Let me know your thoughts and opinion on this case down below. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe if you haven't already. My socials are linked down below if you want to follow me. As always, as a palette cleanser, the doggo picture today is this picture of Clover. Isn't he so cute? I'm sorry, this case is really solemn. I don't know how to be cheery, but this is a picture of Clover. Hopefully he lifts your mood a little. And that's all I have for you. Love you, mean it, kisses. Don't do anything stupid. Stay safe out there, and I'll see y'all next time. Bye.